Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and iTWire TV interview. I'm joined today by Gary Lyng. He's a data expert and the CMO of Aparavi, which is a data intelligence and automation software as a service provider. Welcome to iTWire TV.
Good to be here, Alex. Good to see you too.
Thank you for joining. So, look, I see that Aparavi started in 2017. And I always like to start at the beginning. How has the company evolved in this last 3+ years? And what does it offer to the market today?
Yeah, there was a vision of Adrian Knapp, our founder and CEO and primary investor in the company, and he'd been in data management for many years, and looking at really about unstructured data and how such a mess it is. Suddenly, there's like a tsunami of information and continually growing and copying, and notice really that how much data management is really being done blindly. You're moving, copying data, moving it to the cloud, but you really don't understand its value. So, you thought a few years back, well, maybe there's a way to do like intelligent backup. And they launched and got going around this smart backup that did, classifications and search and indexing of the actual files. But ultimately, people, when they're looking at backup, they just want to back up everything and send it
Mm.
up. And so that gave birth to actually feedback from our customers that said, we really need a platform that really kind of helps us not only discover information, because you go search and use an enterprise search for information, but people are looking for file names. They're very rarely looking like inside the content. And it's been prohibitive in the past where you've had to actually ingest data into another system, then index it, then you can find it. And we've overcome that by being able to do it in place and not being able to just search in one location, but in the complete distributed nature, whether it be football fields of NetApp or EMC or Dell storage devices, or they be in the cloud, or they be on laptops or desktops. We can find the actual information and classify it really quickly. So that
And
was kind of yeah, go ahead.
well, no, I was going to say. I mean, personally, I find myself often looking for information that's in documents. Like I've got no idea what the document name
Yeah.
is, but I know I had that email or that document or somewhere. And so presumably you now search anywhere and you do it in super fast time because that's the way of the world in 2021.
Yeah, it's ironic. We all do it, it's personal or productivity users. IDC even did a study. It was like of a company of 1,000 productivity workers, people like us doing emails and PowerPoints and so forth. They're actually wasting, a company wastes roughly about $6 million a year just trying to find information. And then in a lot of cases, just recreating it again because they couldn't find it. Um,
Do a better
which,
job the
which,
second
which
time round.
yeah, exactly. And so, oh yeah, I did much better. But the reality is with the amount of data growth and the distributed nature of it, and the fact now we've got a lot. It seems to go in waves. Certainly, a lot of attacks. There's a lot of data risk, a lot of breaches. The argument is well, how can you protect something if you don't know where it is? And think of ransomware. Someone get hacks in and they get information. Well, if you knew what data they stole, like someone breaking into your home and they only stole the old broken TV from the corner, you'd be like, well, keep it. You know,
Yeah.
I know what you've stolen. I don't care about it. I'm not paying the ransom for it. So this is really about, providing rapid, easy data insights and then being able to take action on it. All too often people will find data, but then what can you do with it? So from there, we can enable people to automatically classify it. So you can search for a Sarbanes-Oxley or a GDPR compliance thing without necessarily being a lawyer. Because clearly, the difference between a HIPAA and, SOC 2 versus, GDPR for Europe, people don't know all of that. They just want to be able to click on a radio button, search for Alex, and find all that relevant information. And then if it's clearly, like a ticking time bomb, like this could be dangerous for us if it got out, then they can actually lock it down, copy it, move it, delete it, move it up to the cloud. So yeah, we can do data migration to any cloud, but do it intelligently. I mean, one analogy I like to use is like when you move house, you don't move the old couch. You don't move your old sweater that you used to love. You burn it, you throw it away, you get rid of it. Well, we're not doing that when we do cloud migration. We're just We're taking everything lock, stock, and barrel, and we move it up into the cloud and go, well, why are my cloud expenses so high? Well, if you knew what you had, you could actually improve the primary infrastructure, and then you could actually then optimize all the data availability and reduce risk or mitigate risk, and actually do cost avoidance. Forget cost saving, or reducing costs. Stop spending the money on unnecessary things. And so there's kind of just some of the kind of use cases that you kind of get into once you know what you have.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, it's a little bit like when you convert from an old computer to a new computer. There are migration tools, but why would you
Yeah.
want to migrate a lot of those old registry settings or old things about apps that were loaded for that particular version of the operating system? When you're moving to a new one, it can be usually much better to reinstall all the programs from scratch, copy across your data, and you have a much more efficient machine. And that reality is clearly what is now happening in the cloud world as well. I mean, you know, we live in the golden era of data. I mean, we live in the golden era of technology at the moment. It's never been more exciting and better. And, it enables everybody to take advantage of the incredible insights, the data mining of data that people didn't have access to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but which
Yeah.
we now take for granted. And of course, we've seen also the COVID-19 era, and I'll ask you about lessons learned in that a bit later on, but the acceleration that has brought. And Aparavi must have seen a huge wave of this happening with its own customers, with new features that enable customers to do things they couldn't do before, and happy customers who are now much more, they have more insight into the way they're doing business and have probably changed the way they're doing business because of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting evolution when you look at the amount of data. I mean, just look at like us now with the internet. I want to go search on something, or I want to ask, Alexa, tell me this, and we've got no end of the world's biggest encyclopedia. And I think in some cases it's information overload, and we get a lot of hype around machine learning and deep learning and all these analytics tools. Well, how much of that data that you're analyzing is truly relevant information? The irony of it is most enterprises have anywhere between 15 and 60% of their data being trash or garbage, or as I would say back in England, rubbish. It's redundant, obsolete, trivial. I
Or,
could get
or it's
rid of this.
duplicated somewhere
Yeah,
in your,
well, exactly. So not only find duplication, which is another thing. I mean, 10 years ago, everyone was like, oh, dedupe, dedupe, you got to have
yeah.
dedupe. It's just a feature. Clearly, you want to deduplicate, whether it be a source or target or over the wire. That's all about data efficiency. And here we are today trying to generate more data and share more data, and that creates great innovation. But say, for example, you've got, everything's going up to Amazon Azure, and we're doing a whole bunch of compute on data. Well, if I move the clean data, the relevant data, the accurate data to be analyzed on, I'm going to process quicker. It's just physics.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be able to process it, get quicker, better time to insight, quicker time to results, and maybe you can actually solve real world problems quicker. Well, but if you're funneling up garbage to that and clogging up the arteries of the data infrastructure, it's just like getting cholesterol. You get slower and fatter, and inefficiency and inefficient primary infrastructure, and everyone scratches their head and they are presupposing the solution like, oh, we've got a lot of data, let's move to cloud. And actually all you're just doing is delaying the problem or just shifting the problem to another location. So
And unless you've
it's
got
amazing what goes on.
And unless you've got really fast links to that information, you may have even have slowed access to that information down, because instead of being on a local hard disk, it's now in some data center. You've
Yeah,
got to
and
wait
and
for
then
it.
and then you get into all the latency arguments.
Yeah.
I always use this thing when I was looking at computer vision. Well, how do you do facial recognition in the cloud? Well, if you've got an application that's doing facial recognition on your face to open the door, and there's a latency blip, you're going to break your nose. So, I mean, these are sort of almost the painful realities of making sure that the right data is in the right place at the right time and meeting the right SLA, whether it be the service level agreement for an end user, the application, or even machine to actually learn from and process and so on.
So, if you speak to I guess, your competitors, they would presumably claim similar sorts of things. I mean, everyone wants to claim they're doing the latest and greatest to help customers save time and money and speed things up. So, in a nutshell, what really makes Aparavi different and better?
Well, we approach it from an entirely different way. I mean, the irony of it is there is this data ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
storage vendors, backup vendors, big data analytics, enterprise data warehousing in the cloud with Snowflake, all doing their kind of various piece. We focus on making sure we can augment those environments. So let's just pick like backup. If I can actually find all of the data wherever it lives, and report back and remove garbage data, then identify and on an ongoing basis migrate data to the right repository, like an archive. Then actually my backup application is going to run faster. I'm going to be working on less data. I'm going to be using less licenses. And therefore, the backup vendor is not going to like that because they're actually getting less revenue for the end users. But the corporations are going to save boatloads of money. The primary infrastructure, they could now use less high performance compute, less cores. And so everything gets that much simpler. So what we did is we basically created a SaaS-based platform so you can run it basically the agent in a cloud or you can run it on-prem. Again, like I said, it's SaaS-based, very easy to deploy. And we basically go off search. And we do, like I said, the in-place search and indexing. Excuse me. So you can actually, not have to move data to learn from the data. And the indexes are kept within an aggregator of Aparavi, not having to touch your primary infrastructure. So it's all of these key things that people, throw up, red flags around security. Are you going to be intrusive with the performance of my application? So we're non-intrusive. We're in place. And the most important thing, we're simple to use and pricing's easy as well. It's again SaaS-based that you'd be used to and by capacity. So again, really trying to break that mold of, the War and Peace book of pricing that certain, maybe players are actually providing, and augmenting everything. We're not out there trying to replace your storage or replace your backup or replace your replication or your analytics. We're there really to make it smarter and to enable you to do more with less, aka automation.
Yeah, and in a world of rising prices, I mean, companies are always looking for legitimate ways to lower their costs, and to do more with what you already have is a compelling argument because people are like, yeah, well, I don't want to pay more for storage costs or for this or for that, for whatever it might be. And I mean, we really sort of covered some of these things where we talked about the how deduplication used to be that feature, which is big. I used to hear a lot about it 10 years ago, but I don't hear much about it now. And
Yeah.
you spoke about the different sorts of certifications and authentications and GDPRs. I mean, there's structuring um, unstructured but sensitive data like legal, HR, medical, and clinical records that you can tell us about. But also there's the you know data compliance and protection, both against the authenticity of data, against hackers and exfiltration. So I'm sort of just compressing some of these questions into one because we've kind of covered this a little bit. But
Yeah.
tell us about the best managing this unstructured data, this legal, HR, medical, and clinical records. That records today have never been more important. And how do you authenticate that data? Some people are using blockchain. I mean, how are you handling those issues for companies who will be coming to you saying, well, we need help with these areas because we just have so much data in these areas and it's overwhelming.
Yeah, that's half the battle is people don't know where it is. They don't know how it's stored. They don't know how many copies are out there. And they don't know who has access to it. So when you're looking at data management, which has obviously been a term around for many decades, you could even go back to the when we wrote on, not tablets, but basically rocks. I mean, this is
Yeah.
all data management, and the old preface of he or she who has data or has knowledge has the power.
Mm.
Um, People need to trust their data, and all too often there's a level of hierarchy inside organizations as well as technology which they layer on complexity.
Mm.
Oh well, only the compliance officer or only the general counsel truly understands the HIPAA regulations and the IT department don't. Well, if you can pass intelligence into an application that maybe understands the HIPAA regulations, and all you need to do for a search is just to simply click on HIPAA and type in Alex, and it will bring back the relevant information and then actually tell you how many copies there are, where they're located, and to the level. We had one account where we just did a quick install. And this is what we encourage a lot of people to do, is just do a quick install. It takes like 15 minutes and do a quick search to get a glimpse of your data and see if you've got anything burning out of control that could cause you, maybe some legal harm. And within seconds, we were finding buried social security numbers, within documents that just shouldn't be there. And it was like, oh my gosh, people were like, if that's just a glimpse of a problem, how big could the other problem, what else is there? And it's not a one-time thing. You want to continue to maintain, let's call it data hygiene, to keep data health, which then ensures storage health and compute and infrastructure health, and ultimately makes everything a lot more efficient. I read something before we started talking about 2020 was this great boom of cloud for obvious reasons. The amount of video content over things like Zoom calls were just, enormous. Yeah. But now they're predicting this year and next year is actually going to be a decline in cloud, where major enterprises are looking at doing IT consolidation. Well, you can't do IT consolidation unless you know what business it's supporting, what applications it's supporting, but more importantly, what's the lifeblood of that, which is the data itself, and how much is relevant, how much of it is garbage. And then I read something just the other day that IDC updated their data sphere, where literally in the next couple of years, 90% of all data will be unstructured. 80%. I would correct that. But then 90% of that unstructured content is never analyzed. So if 80% of all your data out there is all these files and in their various forms, whether it be a video or an image or a photo of a document or a Word document or a PowerPoint, how can you manage that? And if you're not analyzing it, so you know the state of that information, the placement of that information, and then ultimately its availability. I use that. I remember that because I called it the spa. Nothing to do with hot tubs and going to get your nails done, but SPA, state placement availability. But it helps you kind of remember, if you can ensure that that, then you're going to mitigate some level of risk. You're going to have real good efficiencies in terms of your operating expenses and your capital expenses. But now you can actually truly use the data for analytics and machine learning and reporting, because you're going to be analyzing good data, not bad or old or junk data.
So what is the short version? I mean, I'm sure it's different for every company, for every customer, but of the process that Aparavi goes through with a customer to say, right, well, let's, do this checklist of all the different things we need to look at to make sure the solution is customized and working for you, and you're taking advantage of all those benefits and features. But then how long does it also, on average, take for that to be implemented and for a customer to start getting benefits straight away? I know you mentioned that you can install something in 15 minutes and already see, data that needs to be looked after. But what's, in general, the kind of cycle of what happens?
Yeah, it usually comes down to what problem is the customer trying to solve? Are they trying to solve a compliance need? Are they trying to achieve a level of cost efficiency? One of our customers was actually, had acquired many other companies over the years. And obviously, when you acquire a company, they've got different policies, different processes, different data, and so forth.
You're importing all these silos of information from them to integrate with your own that you're supposed to be breaking down.
So, they're trying to achieve this, and they usually start with a lot of database applications, which, honestly, there's not a lot of data in databases versus unstructured. So first they need to do some level of analysis, but it usually every customer is very different. Everybody comes down to how much data do they think they have. And usually it's way more. There's usually, again, like you said, way more than they originally thought, because it's highly fragmented. They may be looking at, a bunch of, EMC storage boxes and think that's it, but they're not taking into account, cloud drives, cloud storage, PCs, laptops, even individual file servers, departmental, that they just have no control over. So it really depends on not only the size of the data, but also how distributed it is. But what we do is we try to keep it as simple as possible, because once you start using our platform, you're not under any pressure. Oh, you got to go buy $1 million license for whatever period. No, it's a subscription based, monthly or yearly, and it's a very low cost. So the risk to deploy is very low. And really then comes down to, again, the size of the data, how long it takes to sort of index some of the information. And again, what's that immediate pain point I'm trying to solve? And then what's then the additional benefits? Because often people go searching for something because they've got something in mind. I need to go search. They use a search tool, and we have enterprise search as part of the product. But then they start to really find new information. They start to discover assets. And that's clearly all about kind of the discovery and classification. And I say discovery and classification, they are not sequential. You can actually do automatic classification through your search with over 140 or so policies that are pre-canned and pre-done for you by country. The policies for Australia or New Zealand or China or Russia or whatever policies that exist for those countries, as well as custom policies. And then you can truly manage the data lifecycle and understand that. Years ago, obviously, you probably remember the days of EMC and HP talking ILM. And I remember when I was working for both of those companies, people would say, oh, I want to buy an ILM. Like there's a stock keeping unit that you could buy. No, it's a strategy to be proactive about your data management, to understand what you have, and then make informed decisions about that data. But do it, way easier than you used to have to do it. All too often it's been cost prohibitive or complexity prohibitive to actually get to manage your data properly. And that's kind of the egg that we've really cracked in terms of making it simple, scalable, easy, and affordable to do so. So my message to kind of anyone with critical data or any data from that matter is to just use it. You can go get it from our site, and there's no sales guy getting on the call. The only person who'll be talking to you will be usually one of our tech data analysts, and they'll help you get it up and running and play with it. So again, why wouldn't you, as they say?
Well, it's good to see that, after probably the last 10 or 20 years of technology complicating things, that we're finally, everything goes in cycles. So we seem to have gone from that, centralization, decentralization, complexity, and technology is now making things simpler again, as it should be, because that is a sign of technology maturing. And they always say that technology, it has been successful when it just recedes into the background. You don't think of it. Nobody thinks about the power when they just flick the switch. I mean, they just flick the switch and they expect the power to come there. You only notice it's not there when there's an outage and the water doesn't come out of the tap, or the light doesn't come on. Then suddenly you notice something's gone bad. Are there any customers in the US that you'd like to highlight? And can you tell us about some of your international expansion, what you're doing in Europe, Asia Pacific, and if you have any customers in Australia and New Zealand?
Yeah, there's a few in the Asia Pac region and in Australia. I wouldn't touch on those. The irony of it is when you're in the data business, it's all about trust. And then if I go into a company and we find a whole bunch of, data sitting around there, they're not willing to kind of go on and go, hey, we'll be a case study and we'll tell you that we had this mess around.
Yeah. No, I mean, most companies don't want to mention specific business, customers, or the customers themselves don't want to be mentioned, but sometimes they do, and usually you can talk about industry. So,
well, there's one customer in the. That's okay. In the US, there's one customer that really comes to mind. It really came into the cloud migration, and they were doing this big project about moving. You want to move apps there, and then certainly SaaS apps like Salesforce and HubSpot and so forth that were designed there. versus certain applications that you have been developed for on-premise, both for security reasons or legacy reasons.
Mm.
And so clearly there's a migration to other applications there, but data needs to be moved and so forth. And so this one company that will remain nameless at this point, but they did a multi-million-dollar project to kind of move up to actually two clouds, both Azure and AWS, because they wanted to kind of keep them honest with each other in terms of their expenses. And the strange thing is after we'd actually gone in and just for a couple of weeks been working with them, they found so much data that they just could get rid of. And then they had so much other data that said, well, no, we cannot move this to the cloud because it clearly is sensitive. Mm. And then when they started to peel this back, their budget that the number that in their budget literally decreased by 4/5. So 4/5 of what they had budgeted was taken out of the budget, and so they had a much smaller budget sort of cost in terms of moving to the cloud because they were moving just so much less data because now they were informed of what they had. So that was really almost illuminating for them, and also kind of gave gratification in terms of what our product could do. And we didn't have to do the data migration. We just helped them find and build knowledge around their data assets. I'll touch on actually Europe expansion. We just announced a couple of weeks back a new CEO who's an ex-GM of Microsoft Germany, a guy by the name of Gregor Bieler. And he just has joined us to become the CEO of Europe. And so we were founded out of Zurich in Switzerland. Our founder is originally from there. And we established some of the engineering in Santa Monica, California. I joined the company just over about 18 months ago. And my pedigree has always been sort of storage and storage applications and data and so on. But we sort of launched, unfortunately, right in the middle of COVID. So great time, great time to announce the product and a new technology when everyone's hibernating and hiding out. But we moved forward. We kept winning. We made some great noise and got some wins with some great big name customers. Now's the time to kind of accelerate that. The doors are opening. The masks are slowly coming off. And it's pretty exciting now. Now we've established an office central in Munich, and then we'll be expanded. The next one will be certainly pushing things out in Asia. But a lot of companies, as you know, are clearly global. So whether they have headquarters in Singapore or in Sydney, they've got a lot of entities out in the US as well. And so we're trying to join those dots and work on that. But at some point, we'll look to open offices in those locations based on the business demand. And life looks good so far. So a lot of happy customers. But it's an evolution. There needs to be trust. And people need to realize you're not coming in to say, hey, you're quite silly because you bought all of this. Let me show you how not to do that. You really want to kind of help customers, augment their current investment. And to get the money's worth out of what they've already spent, but to do it with smarts and truly understand the data and the impact it can have in terms of being competitive.
Well, Aparavi wouldn't be the first US company to have customers in regions before they've opened offices. I mean, that's a good sign. Companies hear about you and they want to take on your products and services. And it's no surprise that even though you launched during COVID, I mean, I'm sure you would have had a lot of inquiries too as companies said, well, hey, we need to lower our costs. I mean, in Australia, the lockdowns are back because we've been, our country's had such a great success in keeping COVID out that when COVID leaked through hotel quarantine, at the moment we're having this spread again where people are trying to get back to COVID zero, which is the opposite of the strategy the rest of the world has taken. The rest of the world they've been sort of unable to control COVID and they've had to let it run. They've had to accelerate vaccinations.
Run its course,
and now things are opening up. So we're sort of still a bit behind, but companies here are under financial pressure again because you can't open your doors. Everyone has to work from home. So hopefully this will help more companies in Australia and the region know about your products and services and contact you? Because you don't have to, as you say, you don't have to have a local office for people to get in
I think
contact. Yeah.
in Australia as well, there's been a lot of people that seem to be data savvy.
Mm.
Certainly Europe with GDPR and some of the data privacy laws, and holding certain big tech companies accountable for data privacy. And that seems to be there seems to be a lot more awareness in the Asia Pac region, especially Australia, around data sensitivity, people's rights, also data breaches and data hacks. We're certainly not a security company by any means, but by identifying the information, providing you access to that information, now you can put up protection. If you've got jewels in your home, you don't know where they are, how can you lock them up or protect them? So there's some of the kind of considerations, but it's amazing how many people are very much a little bit more savvy these days about how important their data is. And it's not just about keeping, the database running or that one application running and doing backups until the cows come home. I often describe that sort of data protection it's kind of belt and braces, or as they say in the US, they call these suspenders. We that's different in England. But the irony of it is people just back it up every week, back it up every month. And I ask, even when I used to do stuff in that space, when did you go to last year's backup set in the event of a disaster? And the answer is never. So really, when it comes down to backup that was designed for disaster recovery or for a disaster, that's a 72-hour problem at best. The rest of the time, it's records management, an archive, a long-term retention, and they're keeping it around for records. Well, you're using the wrong tool for the wrong workload. So it's funny how things work out and how people adapt and buy a product for one thing and they use it for 8 other things.
Well, that's the sophistication and maturity of technology and the sometimes unpredictability of customers trying to use your solution for problems it wasn't designed to solve. That can be a great thing for companies to say, hey, well, actually, yeah, we can do this. But it's also the problem of businesses trying to run everything off a spreadsheet when there are much better tools.
It's almost like the innovator's dilemma. It's like, it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm using the spreadsheet to do my bookkeeping versus Quicken or an Oracle application. It's too painful to move, and that's just human nature. People think, well, it's too difficult, it's too cost preventative, or it's too complex for me to go find data and get my data act together. It's not until you have even regulatory things that are forcing function for people to get their act together. If I'm a Facebook user and I delete my account, I want Facebook to tell me that they deleted all of my personal and private information. Well, if they've been backing it up for 10 years, how can they prove to me that they've actually done that? And so these are some of the harsh realities and pain points of data center management and data management overall, because it's so deep, it's so broad, it's so distributed. It just makes things a lot more difficult, and then that can inhibit innovation.
So look, as we get towards the end of the interview, one of the questions I always like to ask is if you could please share your memories of your first computer.
Yeah, you're going back a ways now and show my age. You saw the gray hair coming in. I would say it goes back to high school. I think the very first computer was a Commodore PET. And if anyone remembers that device, and you can give that anecdote you shared with me earlier.
When I was 4.5 years old in 1979, my father bought me something called an Exidy Sorcerer, which was a US computer. And I discovered the competition at the time was the Commodore PET and the Apple I. And the Commodore PET, I read subsequently, was the computer that was used in Buck Rogers and the 25th Century. There were some great sci-fi shows in the 70s, Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars itself, Buck Rogers, Blake Seven.
And the little robot.
Yeah,
the little robot would go bleep, 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 bleep.
That's it, yeah. But the Commodore PET sort of had that funny looking monitor that built into it. And that was before the VIC-20, before the C64. So that was one of the earliest modern computers. So you really were there at the beginning.
Yeah, I won't go back into punch cards or anything like that. We did study those in computer science, but I think a funny story.
Kids were, drawing on them. They were
we'd use them
donated
as
by the
little
government
note cards.
departments. Yeah.
Yeah,
Tell us the
it was
story.
kind of funny. Yeah, I was at a company called Ashton Tate, and if you
Yeah,
remember
the
DBase and
DBase
framework and
too.
so
Yeah,
forth, in the support group, and we actually had an old computer back there was called an apricot, and
yeah,
it was actually made out
I
of
remember
wood.
that. Yeah,
And so people probably listen to this going, "Wow!" But it was a prototype, and we were doing testing on it, and it had a wooden cover around the screen and a wooden box. But I'm sure it was there for gimmicks or because they hadn't quite built out the plastic covering. But yeah, that's back in the days of floppy disks and 8-inch floppy disks and moving them into Zytan machines, which was certainly going back a ways. But I'll give you a funny trivia that
sure.
I actually grew up in a little town called Bletchley.
Hmm.
And if you've ever seen the movie Imitation Game, which is the true story of Alan Turing and how they broke the
The
Enigma
Enigma
machine from
machine.
World
Yeah.
War II. And little did I know, but I was in a little Air Force Boys Cadets, a little Air Force, ride my bicycle by there at the age of 12 every day and just barbed wire fence. Never knew. And then, well, I think about 10 years ago, it got declassified and everyone found out. But there's a little bit of trivia. So here we are with Alan Turing's algorithms helping Alexa and Siri do machine learning. And it was an area that I grew up. It's little, I digress, but it was fond memories.
So, if we look to the future, how do you think the data intelligence industry will evolve over the next couple of years, and how do you see that it might have evolved by 2030?
It's interesting. I mean, certainly, who would have predicted certain things? I often look at things like, people out there trying to solve pain points and pain points that they know that they have. But did we have a mobile music problem when Steve Jobs invented the iPod? No, he basically created a market, and then suddenly that evolved to iPhones and so forth.
Yeah,
Did we perceive of a problem?
people were happy with their Walkmans that had 60 minutes of
Yeah,
music. That was the solution of the time. It's not until they eyes were open that you could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket that you suddenly realized how archaic tapes were.
and I remember then that they came out with another iPod, and it had a larger hard drive, and now you can store 10,000 songs. And people say, well, who's going to listen to 10,000 songs? Fast forward, here we are today. Everything needs to be at your fingertips, streaming everything and learning
75
how you like
million
to listen.
songs on Apple
Yeah,
Music. 75
uh,
million.
it's crazy. So where do you take data? I think data has been almost shackled at the ankles, for want of a better word. It's been contained and controlled by one application. Let's just take Slack. Okay, Slack is a great collaboration tool. I can move files, I can chit chat. Same thing with Microsoft Teams, but it's controlled by that application. Now, or it's controlled by the storage that it's sitting on. Well, how about if that information truly became cognitive, that the information could start to learn? And we've seen, the storage industry where we've evolved from, SAN and block storage and gone into files and now into object storage. And they've all got their pros and cons in terms of performance and data capability. But what if data became truly cognitive and not tied to one application and not tied to one storage location, but could truly be utilized on request or on demand, whether it be for machine learning or whether it be for knowledge learning by an individual user, application, or system. So I think it's really open in terms of that. But you brought up something earlier that's true to my heart as well, which is we go through a natural cycle of centralizing and decentralizing, consolidating and then opening up. We went from mainframes to client server to mobile devices. And now you basically got this, the ether of data that's just floating around everywhere. How do you harness it? How do you protect it? How do you protect individuals? But more importantly, how do you really put it to work so you could solve, leukemia quicker, solve real problems? And again, with great power comes great responsibility I think Spider-Man said that one.
Yeah.
But again,
Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben.
Uncle
He's
Ben said that one. So, I mean, there's clearly no end in terms of possibilities. I think all too often the biggest inhibitor is complacency. In terms
and
of
lack
people,
of
don't
knowledge.
break it, it don't fix. Lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, and fear, and certainly in doubt of what's out there. Those are probably some of the real inhibitors. And so sometimes we just need to get out of the way and sort of let things grow.
It's also out of the box thinking, thinking laterally and seeing things in a new light. Changing your perspective can do wonders on seeing if a situation is a problem or an opportunity.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so my second last question is to ask you if you could please share some of the best advice you've received in life to help you get where you are today.
Well, I think the best advice was, always inspire without being too much of a cliche. I find that, whether you're inspiring your kids to do something or, in an office situation where someone comes in and you don't just try and solve the problem, but you help them, you try to inspire them to come up with new ideas and they go away and they come back and go, look, it is so fulfilling. I almost, if I were to do it over again, would I go back and be a kindergarten teacher? Because that level of gratification that you're making a difference in the world. I can certainly help to a point, but I'm not saving lives. I'm not a surgeon or anything. But I think the best advice I ever got was always inspire, because it will give it back to you 1,000-fold, and give you a better, more meaningful life.
So Gary, what's your final message to iTWire viewers and readers and to your current and future customers and partners?
I think it's just basically one word, one little sentence, which is know your data. Don't continue doing blind data management. Certainly, come look at Aparavi. It's a great platform. We've got a great roadmap over the next few years as well. That's going to really be game changing in terms of how people are managing and working with data. But you got to know your data. That's first and foremost. Whatever tool, whatever application, whatever infrastructure you've got, start with Aparavi, start with this platform, know your data, and now you can make informed, intelligent decisions on the state, placement, and availability of that content moving forward.
Well, Gary Lyng, a data expert and Chief Marketing Officer of Aparavi, thank you very much for your time. I wish you the best of luck with the European and eventual global expansion, and I hope we get to talk again in the future.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex. And thanks for all the tips that you gave me at the beginning of the Apple ecosystem. Very, very informative and very helpful too.
No worries. Yeah, I'll have to do a separate video about that to show people some of the cool tips and tricks. But thank you very much, and I'll talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.
Beautiful. Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you.